It's a chilling thought, isn't it? I mean, just imagine thousands of people just vanish every year, just gone, no trace.
It really is. Yeah, just gone. Just like that.
And today we're going to dive deep into one of those cases, one that's really, really perplexing. The disappearance of Rosemary Gayart.
Yeah.
We're going to be looking at letters, police reports. We're even going to be looking at uh, some stuff from a potential suspect
Interesting.
to see if we can figure out what happened to her.
Yeah. I mean, it really does highlight just how quickly, how suddenly someone can just disappear, just be gone from our world, you know?
Right. And for Rosemary's family, this isn't just some old case file. This is something that's been with them, that's haunted them
Mm-hmm.
for almost 40 years.
Right.
So before we get into the nitty-gritty, the mystery of it all, let's just try and picture Rose, who she was before she vanished.
Right.
What kind of person was she? What do we know about her?
Well, from what we can piece together, she was a young woman who had already gone through a lot, more than her share of hard times. I mean, she lost her infant son just a few years before she moved to Florida, and that must have been just absolutely devastating.
I can't even imagine losing a child. That must be just the worst.
Yeah, truly.
Do we know anything about her son's death, like what happened?
The details are, well, a little fuzzy, but it seems like there were accusations and a legal battle even, and she ended up entering an Alford plea.
I'm not really familiar with that.
Right, so that means she didn't admit guilt, but she acknowledged that she could be convicted if the case went to trial, yeah.
Oh, I see. So it was kind of like a compromise.
Yeah, exactly, but it does suggest that, she went through something really complicated, probably even traumatic.
So not only was she dealing with just the unimaginable grief of losing her son, but she also had, suspicion hanging over her.
Yeah, the shadow of doubt.
It's no wonder she wanted a fresh start, a new beginning.
Absolutely, and that's what led her to Florida with her boyfriend Bobby in 1984.
Right.
They wanted, the sunshine, a new life, a chance to escape all the darkness of their past.
Did things get better for her when she moved? Did she find that fresh start?
At first, yeah, it seems like things were looking up. We have letters she wrote to her sister Lori, and they're full of excitement about their new life.
Oh, wow. So she was happy.
Yeah, she talks about getting pictures taken with Bobby, dreaming of buying a house, even happy about finally having a car.
Nice.
You can really sense the hopefulness in those early letters.
Yeah, it sounds like she was putting the past behind her, building a new life.
But then things change. There's this, like a shadow falls over everything.
Oh.
The tone of the letters shifts, and she starts talking about tension with Bobby's mother, Dorothy.
Ah, the mother-in-law.
Right, the classic in-law conflict. But it seems like it was more than just the usual family disagreements.
Deeper than that.
Yeah, in one letter, she mentions feeling like a burden, like she's walking on eggshells around Dorothy all the time. And then in a phone call with her mother, she reveals that she's pregnant again.
Wow. Another baby. That must have, complicated things even more.
It definitely did. During that call, she tells her mother that both Bobby and Dorothy are pressuring her to terminate the pregnancy.
Oh, wow.
She feels trapped, alone, desperate, in a new state, still reeling from the loss of her first child, and now facing this immense pressure from the people she should have been able to lean on.
That's awful.
You can just hear the distress in her voice during that call.
So this was the last time anyone heard from her, this phone call.
Yes, after that, nothing. Complete silence, no more letters, no more calls.
Just gone.
And that silence, that's what finally made her family realize that something was very wrong.
So when did they realize that she wasn't just out of touch, but actually missing?
Well, there was a bit of a delay. At first they thought she was just busy, maybe avoiding difficult conversations. But then some things came up, red flags.
Red flags? Like
One of the biggest ones came from an unexpected place, Bobby's employers.
his employers?
Yeah, they were worried because Bobby was acting strange at work, giving weird explanations for Rose's absence.
Oh, what was he saying?
This really bizarre story claiming the FBI had taken Rose away for questioning, related to her son's case.
The FBI?
Yeah, it was completely made up, and that made them even more suspicious.
Right. If everything was fine, why lie?
Exactly. It makes you wonder, what's he trying to hide? And that's what led them to file a missing persons report with the police.
So the police get involved.
Yeah, the investigation officially begins.
What do they find? Do they uncover anything about what happened to Rose?
It's a mixed bag, some dead ends, some interesting leads. They interview Bobby and Dorothy, and their stories are full of inconsistencies.
Oh, so they're not helping.
Not really. They keep changing their stories, blaming each other, and nothing really adds up.
Sounds suspicious.
And then there's this box, a box of important documents that Bobby told the police about.
What was in the box?
Rose's late son's birth and death certificates, her own ID, all these irreplaceable things.
Why would she leave that behind? Especially if she was running away, starting a new life. It doesn't make sense.
It really doesn't. It makes it seem like her leaving was sudden, unplanned, and it casts doubt on the idea that she just ran off. And then there's this letter Dorothy wrote to Rose's mother. It's almost like she was trying to make Rose look bad.
Really?
Yeah, like she was getting ready for questions and wanted to control the narrative.
Interesting.
In the letter, she says Rose left with a man in a red truck, which, could be a plausible explanation.
Okay.
But then she also says she bought Rose a bus ticket back to New York, which Rose refused.
So she's saying Rose chose to leave with this guy.
It's a weird mix of details and accusations. You can't really tell what her real intentions were.
Yeah, like she's trying to say Rose left on her own, but also maybe she's not so reliable.
Right. It just raises more questions.
What did the police make of all this? Do they focus on this man in the red truck?
That red truck, yeah, that becomes a big part of the investigation.
Oh, before we get into that, I wanted to ask, you mentioned earlier that Rose worked at a hot dog place in Florida.
Right, briefly, yeah.
Did the police look into that?
They did. They checked her work history, found out she'd worked at a hot dog stand for a bit, but it led nowhere.
Nowhere. What do you mean?
It seems she didn't work there long. No one really remembered her, and this was before social media, so it was a lot harder to find people.
Yeah, things were different back then.
Every lead was a lot of work, and a lot of times they just hit a wall.
Must have been frustrating for everyone involved.
Definitely. So yeah, that lead went nowhere.
What happened next?
Yeah.
Did they find anything new, or did the case go cold?
Well, despite their efforts, the initial investigation just didn't give them any real answers. Leads dried up, witnesses contradicted each other, and the trail went cold.
Oh, man, that's rough.
It was a tough time for Rose's family, just not knowing, stuck in limbo.
It's a story that makes you think, how many other cases are out there like this, just unsolved, families left in the dark?
It really does. It shows just how complicated these missing person cases can be, especially back then.
But even with time passing, one person refused to let Rose's memory fade. Her sister, Lori.
Lori, yeah, she became a real advocate for her sister. She was determined to find out the truth.
What did she do? How did she keep Rose's case alive?
Well, we'll get into that after a quick...
No, let's say that for next time. I'm really curious to hear more about Lori and what she did.
Yeah, she really took matters into her own hands.
We'll pick up right there in the next part of our deep dive into the disappearance of Rosemary Gayart.
It's a story you won't want to miss.
See you then.
See you then.
So we were talking about Lori and how dedicated she was to finding out what happened to Rose.
Yeah, she was incredible. She just refused to let Rose's case be forgotten.
Yeah.
She was constantly in touch with the police, always pushing for updates, urging them to follow every lead, no matter how small.
Wow, she didn't let up.
Not at all. She organized vigils, gave interviews to the newspapers, even appeared on TV, all to raise awareness about Rose.
It's amazing how much one person can do just by being determined,
It really is. And, she became like Rose's voice when Rose couldn't speak for herself.
That's a good way to put it.
And she didn't just keep Rose's name out there. She also connected with other families of missing people.
Really?
Yeah, sharing their stories, offering support, during those times when hope starts to fade.
That must have been helpful for everyone involved.
Absolutely. Just knowing you're not alone, that other people understand what you're going through.
And it was through this network, this connection with other families, that Lori found something that would change everything.
Yeah, it's pretty amazing how it happened.
Okay, now I'm really intrigued. What was this game changer?
So in 2020, think about it, almost 35 years after Rose disappeared, Lori comes across this news article. It was about a cold case murder in the same area where Rose had vanished.
Oh.
And the case had finally been solved using DNA evidence, and the killer, a man named Roland Davis, had been convicted.
A cold case solved after all those years.
Yeah.
That's incredible. But how did this lead back to Rose?
Well, as Lori read more about this Roland Davis, she started noticing things.
Like what?
He'd been a regular at some of the same bars that Rose used to go to back before she disappeared.
Okay.
And even more chilling, his description matched what witnesses had said about the man Rose was last seen with, the one in the red truck.
Wait, are you serious? The red truck?
Yeah, the red truck. All those years later, it was like a light bulb went off for Lori. She was convinced this Davis was somehow involved in Rose's disappearance.
It's like the pieces of the puzzle were finally starting to fit together.
Right, the timing, the location, the description. And this Davis, he had a history of preying on women.
Wow, this must have been huge for Lori after all this time. A real break in the case.
It was, a mix of hope and fear and this renewed sense of purpose.
So what did she do? Did she go to the police?
Oh, yeah, right away. She contacted them, told them everything, urged them to look into Davis. She was like, this is it. This is the guy.
I mean, you can't blame her after all she'd been through.
The police, they were hesitant at first, reopening such an old case.
Yeah, I can understand that.
But Lori, she wouldn't back down. She was persistent. And the evidence, well, it was pretty compelling.
So they agreed to take another look.
They did. They started looking into Roland Davis.
And what did they find? Did they connect him to Rose's disappearance?
Well, this is where this story takes another twist.
Other one.
Lori, she wanted to confront Davis. She wanted to look him in the eye, demand answers. Even if he didn't confess, she thought maybe she could get something out of him,
Wow, that's brave to face a convicted killer like that.
It is. But just as she was getting ready to do that, she got some terrible news. Davis had died in prison.
Oh no, are you serious?
Yeah, brain cancer.
After all those years of searching, to come so close, and then...
I know. It was a huge blow for Lori, the chance to finally confront the man she believed held the answers. It was gone.
But even with Davis gone, there was still a glimmer of hope, right?
Right. You see, Davis had been interviewed extensively for that cold case murder, the one that put him away.
Okay.
And in those interviews, he said some pretty incriminating things.
What do you mean?
He admitted to picking up women in the same area around the same time Rose disappeared.
Oh, wow.
He talked about driving a truck that matched the descriptions of the one Rose was last seen in.
So it was him.
And he even talked about his patterns, how he targeted vulnerable women who were alone, looking for connection.
It's like he was confessing without even realizing it.
It really is, but he never mentioned Rose specifically, so it's possible he just didn't remember her, or maybe he was deliberately holding back information.
So frustrating to have the suspect, but not the proof.
It is, and while it's tempting to say, okay, Davis did it, case closed, we have to remember, without concrete evidence, the mystery is still unsolved. But wait, there's more.
More?
You mentioned earlier that Davis was a suspect back in '85, right?
Yeah, right after Rose disappeared.
So the question is, why didn't they investigate him more thoroughly back then?
That's a good question. What happened?
Well, back then, Davis wasn't known as a serial killer. He hadn't committed the crimes that would later make him infamous.
Oh, I see. So he was just one of many potential suspects.
Exactly. And without DNA technology, which was brand new back then, it was much harder to connect the dots.
So they just didn't have the tools to really build a case against him.
Right. And so he slipped through the cracks.
It makes you wonder how many other cases could be solved if we could go back and apply modern techniques.
It really does. It's a reminder that we need to keep looking at these old cases, especially the ones from before DNA and all that.
So even though Davis is gone, the search for answers doesn't have to end.
Right. There are still things that can be done, leads to follow.
Like what? What else can be done?
Well, for starters, the police could re-examine all the old evidence. Maybe there are DNA samples from back then that could be tested now.
Oh yeah, with the technology we have now.
Exactly. Or maybe there are witness statements that could be looked at again, with fresh eyes. Maybe they missed something back then.
Looking at an old photo and suddenly noticing something you never saw before?
Right. And besides the evidence, they could also try to find people who knew Davis back then. Maybe someone remembers something important.
It's a long shot, but you never know, right?
You never know. Someone out there might have the missing piece of the puzzle.
And even if they don't find a definitive answer, at least maybe they can give Rose's family some closure, some understanding of what happened.
That's right. It's important to keep searching, to keep trying to find the truth, no matter how much time has passed.
So after all this, what do you think? What are the chances of ever finding out what really happened to Rose?
That's a tough one. I mean, we're talking about a case that's almost 40 years old, with so much mystery surrounding it, and now with key people like Davis gone.
Yeah, it's a lot of obstacles.
It is, but I think it's important to stay hopeful, hopeful that maybe a new witness will come forward or a new piece of evidence will be found.
Hope that maybe, even after all this time, the truth will come out.
Exactly. Hope never dies. And that brings us to the end of this part of our deep dive into the disappearance of Rosemary Gayart.
You know, going through all of this, it's amazing how many twists and turns there are in Rose's case.
It really is.
I mean, it started with so much hope, a fresh start.
New beginning.
And then it all went dark. And now it's like we're somewhere between not knowing and maybe finding out. It's a lot to process.
It is.
What do you think, what stands out to you as the biggest mystery in all of this?
It's the chance encounters,
Chance encounters.
Yeah, like if Lori hadn't seen that article about the cold case.
Right, the murder.
Would they have ever considered this Davis as a suspect in Rose's disappearance? It makes you wonder how many other cases are out there, just waiting for that one little connection to be made.
It's like the answer was right there all along, but no one saw it.
Exactly, but the thing is, this isn't a TV show, this is real life, and for Rose's family, this isn't some puzzle to be solved, it's their lives, their sister, and they've been waiting for answers for decades.
It's heartbreaking.
And it just shows how these missing person cases, they often depend on the smallest details, a tiny connection, an old photo, anything that can jog someone's memory or reveal something that was hidden.
So it's not just about having good detectives, it's about being lucky, too.
Well, luck helps, but it's not enough. It takes persistence, dedication, a willingness to look at old evidence with fresh eyes. Like in Rose's case, it was Lori who kept pushing, kept the investigation alive, even when it seemed hopeless.
She never gave up. She's amazing.
And her story, it shows just how important families and advocates are in these cases.
It's the ones who keep the pressure on.
Exactly. They keep the case in the public eye. They make sure their loved ones aren't forgotten. And that's so important.
So it's not just up to the police. It takes a whole community to find answers to get justice. So what can people do, our listeners, besides trying to remember if they were in Florida in the 80s?
Well, share Rose's story. Keep her name out there. The more people who know, the better the chances that someone will come forward with information.
Someone knows something, right?
Right. And even if you don't have any personal connection to the case, you can still support organizations like the Center for Hope. They help families of missing persons. They provide resources, support.
They help them through a really tough time.
They do, and they remind these families that they're not alone.
What advice would you give to families going through something like this? I mean, it's just unimaginable.
Never give up hope. Keep asking questions, keep pushing for answers, find support groups, connect with other families, and share your loved one's story. Keep their memory alive.
Don't let them be forgotten.
And never underestimate the power of your voice. You can make a difference.
Well, as we wrap up this deep dive into Rose's story, it's a mix of sadness and hope. Sadness for her family, for all the unanswered questions, but hope that maybe, just maybe, someone out there knows something that can finally bring this case to a close.
It's a story that reminds us how precious life is, how strong the bonds of family are, and how important it is to never stop searching for the truth, no matter how long it takes.
Thank you for joining us on this journey, and if Rose's story has touched you, if you have any information, no matter how small, please contact the authorities. You could be the one to help bring peace to a family that's been waiting far too long for answers.
Every little bit helps.
Until next time, stay curious, stay informed, and most importantly, stay hopeful.